authentication of the payment itself, right? So anything which authenticates my transaction calls as a sensitive authentication data. So are you clear about the PAN, which is a 16-digit card number or a 15-digit card number in terms of American Express?
Yes, yes.
Magnetics. Yeah, so this is
Yeah.
clear.
Yes, yes.
All right. Now, from a track 1 and track 2 perspective, we have two tracks. One is a track 1, which is 79 characters in length, and we have track 2, which is 40 characters in length. Now, track 1 contains a specific sequence of digits. So it starts with a sentinel, which is typically a percentage sign, which denotes a start of the string. Then we have a format code, which is a single character, typically used as B. Then we have a payment card number or a account number. So that's what is a 16 digit or a 15 digit number. So that will come. Then we have a field separator in terms of the character, the caret character, and then we have a NM, which is a 2 to 26 characters reserved for the last name, first name, middle name. So we have these 2 to 26 characters which are reserved for the name which is embossed on the card. Again, we have a field separator as a caret symbol. Then we have 4 digits from an expiration date perspective, which is in a YY and DD format. Then we have 3 digits, which is a service code. This service code belongs to a bank or an acquirer or an issuer. So these 3 digits are reserved for the service code from a bank perspective. Then we have DD, which is a discretionary data or the balance of characters. Now in this DD, we have our CVV2 numbers or the digits, which is a 3 digit. These are also stored in this DD section. And then the end string character, which is the end sentinel in the question mark. At the last, we have the LRC bit, which is a redundancy check bit, and this is calculated in accordance with the ISO 7811-2 standard. Now, the purpose of this LRC is to verify whether there is any change in the data that has happened or not. So it is kind of a checksum value for the entire digits to see if the integrity of the data is retained or has been tampered with. So clear on a track 1? Okay. Then we have a track 2 data as well, which is a shorter 40 character in length data. Again, this data is on the black magnetic stripe itself. So along with track 1, the track 2 data also stores there. Uh, this this provides for a shorter processing time where we have the older dial-up connections. So rather than sending the 79 characters over the wire, if we need to speed up the transaction, we can use these 40 characters as well. And these 40 characters consist of, again, like a sentinel, start sentinel, then the PAN, separator, as in the caret symbol, then expiration date in, again, the month and the year, MMDD format. Then we have a service code from a bank perspective. We have a PIN verification data and the CVV2 data, all this put together in the 40 characters.
Can you tell me the difference between track 1 and track 2 again? I missed it.
Okay, sure. So if you look at a track 1, it contains one extra element, which is between the length of 2 to 26 characters, which is the NM character or the NM parameter, which is a name. In track 2, you don't see that name character here. And the reason for that is in the older systems where we didn't had a 4G network or a Wi-Fi network, the software in the pin entry devices or the swipe terminals, if you do not have a great capacity to connect to an ISP or an internet service provider and then to the payment network, you are mostly reliant on the modems and the dial-up network. So if you are on a slower network, then a track 2 data is used. If you are on a little bit faster network, which is the modern network, then the track 1 data is used. Now, in both track 1 and track 2, your card number, which is a PAN, it remains there. Expiration date is common across the two. Your PIN verification data and the CVV2 numbers are common across the two. The difference is in the name that we use. The difference is in uh, the reserved or the discretionary data characters, which is there in the track 1 and which is not there in the track 2.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. So, and this entire data is stored in an unencrypted format. Okay, so you can buy a device which is a credit card duplicator or a card duplicator on Amazon for about 10,000 to 12,000 rupees, and it also ships you a software and some free cards to use. So you can use that particular machine to clone a card as well. If you have an access to a physical card, you can clone those cards. And why? Because the data which is stored is unencrypted, so you can swipe once your original card, it copies the data, and then in the second swipe you create a new card by writing that copied data onto the newer card. So you basically copy the portion from one card to another card and you have a duplicate card ready. And this machine comes only for 10,000 to 12,000 bucks on Amazon.in as well.
Okay.
Okay, so probably I can later I can show you a demonstration of this as well, just to show you how we can clone a card using those card duplicators.
Okay.
Okay, then uh, so this was all about the card and the terms that we need to be aware from a card perspective. Now, what happened was there were 5 payment brands. And when I say a payment brand, it is Visa, MasterCard, JCB, Discover, and American Express. So these 5 payment brands had their own security compliance programs. So if I am a business owner or if I'm a merchant accepting Visa payments, then Visa will say, I will only allow you to integrate your network with my network, or I will only accept the payment coming from you once you adhere to these security requirements of mine. So Visa will share their own security requirements. MasterCard will share their own side of security requirements, and likewise for the rest 3 payment providers or the payment brands as well. Now, it was becoming really difficult for a merchant to comply to all the 5 different security compliances from all 5 different payment brands. So they reached out to these payment brands and said, look, I am already complying to Visa. Can't you just take my compliance on Visa and give me an access to MasterCard network? So MasterCard will say, no, I don't agree to Visa's standard. You have to comply to my standard. And similar is the case with JCB, Discover, and American Express. So these 5 payment brands, they came together in early 2000s and they formed a council, which is a PCI Security Standards Council, and this council was formulated in 2006. Now, this PCI Security Standards Council is an independent body that these 5 payment brands formulated. And the role of this PCI Security Standards Council was to create security standards which can be acceptable by all the 5 payment brands. So PCI Security Council will create a security requirement which Visa will accept, MasterCard will accept, JCB, Discover, and American Express will accept. And they will also maintain those security standards by reviewing the feedback coming from the industry, from the merchants, from the banks, and then updating those security standards as well on a periodic basis. So they will have to maintain those security standards as well. So that was a key role of the PCI Security Standards Council. Later on, These 5 payment brands also enabled the Security Council to maintain the list of QSAs, which is a qualified security assessors and internal security assessors as well. Now, these QSAs are nothing but the auditors. So PCI Security Council now maintain a public list where you can go and verify the auditor name and the company as well, whether those are licensed auditors or not. So you can verify those details on the PCI Security Standards Council website. Now, so these were the payment brands. This is the council. Then comes the payment brands. And then these payment brands and the council was working along with issuers, acquirers, merchants, service providers, vendors, and the hosting providers as well. Now, who are issuers? Issuers are the bank who issues you a card. So, for example, if I am having an American Express card, then for me, I am the card holder and American Express is a issuer. If I am having an ICICI bank card, then ICICI is an issuer and I am a card holder. Similarly is the case with other banks. Now, if I am a card holder and ICICI is an issuer and I go to, let's say, trivenijewels.com, a website, and I buy some jewelry from that particular store, then trivenijewels.com becomes a merchant. Okay. So ICICI Bank is an issuer. I am the card holder. Triveni Jewels is a merchant. Now, this merchant will have a bank account with, let's say, HDFC Bank. So HDFC for Triveni Jewels is an account holder, but the for the PCI or for the payment flow, HDFC Bank becomes an acquirer of that transaction. Okay. So I am a card holder, ICICI is an issuer, Triveni Jewels is a merchant, and HDFC Bank, who is holding the account for Triveni Jewels, is an acquirer. Now, once I do the transaction as a card holder, when I do a transaction, it flows through certain channel that we will see in detail. So it flows through a certain channel before the receipt or the confirmation comes out of the terminal or till the time I see a confirmation on the web page. So these are merchants, acquirers, and the issuers. Now there are entities which are also called as service providers. Service providers are the entities which which supports either the issuers or acquirers or merchants or payment brands. So they are the service provider. Example, Wipro develops a software for MasterCard from their Chennai office. So in this case, since Wipro is supporting MasterCard, so Wipro becomes a service provider. Another example, let's say Barclays Bank is there in UK and they have a BPO tie-up with Intelinet in Mumbai. So Intelinet becomes a service provider for a Barclays Bank because they are supporting Barclays on the customer support, which is related to the card process. Okay. Another example, let's say if I am a target and I have a HVAC vendor, then that HVAC vendor is a service provider to me till the time they are servicing my equipments. So if they are maintaining the humidity levels or the equipments to maintain that humidity level in my data center, uh, and in that data center, my payment related infrastructure is also there. So they are the service provider for the target as a company. So those entities are called the service providers. And then we have the vendors or the hosting providers as well, wherein the cloud providers most of the time will come in fit now because they are also hosting the payment related applications on their infrastructure. So they are also kind of a service provider slash the hosting providers. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. Now, from a role and responsibility standpoint, Like I said, PCI Security Standards Council is an independent organization which was formed in 2006. They are responsible for the development management of the security standards that they develop. Then we have payment brands, which is Visa, MasterCard, JCB, Discover, and American Express. And each of these payment brands have their own security program. Like American Express has DSOP, Discover has DISC, JCB has DSP, and on. So these payment brands have their own security program and they maintain it separately as well. Then payment brand compliance program also include the tracking and enforcement, penalties, fees, compliance, deadlines, etc. These are something which a merchant, if they want to specifically deal with Visa security program and not to go with the PCI DSS kind of a security standard, they can still comply with the Visa's requirement. It's up to a merchant or an entity to decide whether they want to go with the PCI security standard or they want to go with the respective individual payment brand security standard. So these payment brand maintains their own security standards as well. Then card holder is like an individual, myself, yourself, which or who can do either a card present or a card not present transaction. Card present is a transaction where the card is physically presented for a transaction, and card not present are the online transactions where we do not need a physical card. Then we have issuer and acquirer. Issuer are the banks who basically issues a payment card on behalf of the payment brand, which is like a co-branded cards that we see ICICI and Visa or ICICI and MasterCard and stuff like that. So banks are the issuers. In case of American Express, Discover, and JCB, these are closed network or a closed loop networks wherein they don't have a specific issuer. They themselves are the issuer. So American Express is not a co-branded card. American Express is an American Express card. Visa doesn't have a Visa card. Visa has a ICICI Visa card or HDFC Visa card. American Express has American Express card. So they are in a way they are a closed loop banking or a payment system, whereas Visa and Mastercard are a open loop payment system or a payment brand. Then we have acquirer. Acquirers, like I said, are the banks with which merchants have account. So if I am a merchant, let's say Amazon, if I am a merchant as Amazon and I have a bank account with somebody, that somebody is the acquirer. And these acquirers can be a bank, can be a third party nominated by the banks as well. So I'll give you an example.
So here Razorpay, Instam also are acquirers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, for example, PayU, for example, Razorpay, for example, Electra Card. These are all, they are not the banks, but they have a payment gateway where people enter their card details and they complete the transaction. So they are also an acquirer. Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Then we have merchants, and merchants are like the business entities, like we talked about Amazon, Triveni Jewels, and so on. So they are the merchants who accept the payment card for the payment during a purchase. Then the responsibility of an acquirer is little elevated. So acquirers are responsible for their merchant compliance as well. So for example, if HDFC Bank is an acquirer, or let's say if Razorpay is an acquirer, and with Razorpay, there is a business entity who has a business relationship. So let's say if Proton is a merchant and Razorpay is an acquirer, then if Razorpay has to get a PCI security compliance done for themselves, they will have to ensure that even Proton is certified on PCI. So their compliance is linked with Proton's compliance as well. So they are responsible for any breach that happens in the merchant environment as well. So they are party to it as well. Okay. And if any non-compliance happens with uh, with a payment brand like Visa, MasterCard, etc., if any non-compliance happens, then they are also liable for it. So if Proton Technosoft gets breached tomorrow and a payment card details gets compromised, then Razorpay will be a party to that breach, and whatever liability that Visa or MasterCard will put on Proton, that will also be shared, or the Razorpay will also be a party to that liability as well. So hence the role of an acquirer is very, very
So,
risky.
what liability this Proton Tech will face at that time? Nothing, right?
No, so for example, if I have not taken a due diligence, or if I have not taken uh, uh, I would say, proper measures for maintaining a security of my card data environment, then I am responsible for the penalties which are being put in by Visa or MasterCard. So whatever amount that they put as a liability, I will have to incur that expense.
Okay.
Now, as Razorpay is giving me the services,
Hmm.
and because of Razorpay not verifying my compliance, Razorpay is also a party of that liability.
Okay.
So, right? So Razorpay is also accountable to
So
ensure,
generally, let's say
yeah,
like we have a e-commerce website and
hmm,
we have integrated Razorpay gateway to it.
correct,
So if someone is coming to a website and purchasing, we
hmm,
don't have their card credentials saved with us, right? This
correct,
complete work is taking care of that gateway. So if our
yes,
website is hacked, we are responsible for customer data, but not for the cards, right? Because cards
yes,
access itself we don't have. So how we will be liable for it?
yes, good question. So what happened when you integrate, let's say, a Razorpay with a website?
Hmm.
Now, it is it is assumed that you as a, so for example, if I am owning a website and you are a customer visiting my website,
Mm-hmm.
then if I create a page and and tells you enter your card number, and on the next screen complete the transaction. Okay, so
Okay.
you will enter the card number on my website, you will
Okay.
press the next button. On the next button, I will take your card number and give it to the Razorpay, where you will complete the transaction. Now, if this is the situation, then on my website, I am taking a card number of a consumer
Okay.
and I
Okay.
may be storing it, right? And I may
Okay.
not be storing it. So if
Okay.
I am accepting a card number on my website, then I am responsible for the security of that card detail. If Razorpay is accepting the payment on their website, still I am responsible. How? Because the redirection of the payment page from my cart, when I say make purchase and there is a new page loads up, if my website is hacked or is compromised, I can take a customer to a phishing page or to a
Mm-hmm.
artificially curated page which looks like a Razorpay. So the user will, innocent user will enter the card detail there, and the details will be compromised. So even
Yeah.
I am responsible for the, for ensuring the payment security at my end, even though I am not taking the card detail on my website,
Okay. Got
right?
it. Hmm.
Razorpay, any which ways, have to be compliant with the PCI program because they are taking the card. So what happened when we are integrating Razorpay with the website? They take typically a undertaking from the website that you are ensuring all the security measures with the integration being taking place. And any risk which is coming out of this integration, Razorpay is not liable to, or is not a party to that liability. So
Okay.
they
Got it.
typically sign up a contract just to, from a legal standpoint, they basically shed off their responsibility.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So these are some of the common acquirer responsibilities. Now, what happened when we make a purchase? So Here, a cardholder, let's say we go for a grocery shopping and we make a transaction at Big Bazaar. So we are a
Okay.
cardholder. We made a transaction at Big Bazaar, who is a merchant. The acquirer in this case can be a HDFC Bank. So the transaction from merchant to acquirer will come. So acquirer will look at that particular transaction and will see, okay, this is not for me. This card belongs to an ICICI bank and I don't have this account holder information with me. So I cannot verify the card detail and I cannot verify the balance in this account, let's say. So the
Okay.
HDFC bank will try to reach to an issuer, which is a ICICI bank. Now, HDFC Bank doesn't have a direct connectivity with the ICICI Bank. So there has to be an intermediary which can connect both HDFC and ICICI. That is where a payment brand network comes into the picture, which is Visa, MasterCard, etc. So if I am using a ICICI Visa card, then HDFC will put me onto the Visa network. So HDFC will say, Visa, this is a transaction that I have received. I don't know how to reach to this XYZ bank. And since it's a Visa card, I'm sharing this transaction with you so that you can route this transaction correctly. So the transaction will come to Visa. Visa will determine based on the issuer details. Visa will determine whether this transaction is for ICICI Bank or not. So Visa will say, okay, this transaction looks for ICICI. Let me send this transaction to ICICI. So Visa will forward that request to issuer, which is the ICICI in this case. ICICI will receive that transaction and will authenticate and authorize that transaction. When I say authenticate, they verify whether the card number is correct or not, whether the PIN that a user has entered or a ATM PIN that is valid or not. So that's a authentication that happens for that particular transaction. Once the card is authenticated, then the authorization happens. Now, in this authorization, there are certain fraud controls as well, which takes place. So, for example, a transaction, which is a card present transaction, happened in India 10 minutes before. Same card is being used in America in next 10 minutes in a card present formation wherein no duplicate card has been issued on the account. In 10 minutes, a card cannot physically travel from India to US. So that's a red alert. So authorization fails. Other kind of authorization, if you look at some of the cards, it says not to be used in Bangkok or not to be used in Nepal or not to be used in Hong Kong. So these are some high risk countries. So any transaction, which is a card present transaction, if it comes from the restricted or a high risk country, that's a red alert from a fraud control standpoint. The third fraud control is if I am using a card, let's say at a, uh, so let's say my behavior or my pattern of using a card is every month I don't spend over 50,000 on that card. But in a particular time, I'm spending 2 lakh rupee, which is atypical of my behavior or of my pattern. That's also a red flag. And that is where many a time you see somebody from the bank calling you up and verifying whether you yourself have made that transaction or not. So they will call you up and say, we have received this transaction, wanted to verify if you have made this transaction. So if you say yes, that's where the transaction will be approved. So those are the fraud controls which are inbuilt. Now, once the fraud controls are passed, then comes the authorization check. In the authorization check, the bank verifies whether this account holder belongs to the bank or not. So Paras Aroda belongs to ICICI Bank? Yes. Active account? Yes. The transaction is for 10,000 rupees. Whether he has that balance on the card? Yes, approved. Whether the limits are okay for this 10,000 or whether Paras has set up a 5,000 limit per transaction. So 10,000 limit is approved. Okay. So once these authorization checks are done, that's where issuer approves or declines the request. So the request, ICICI will say, okay, I have authenticated the card. I have authorized the card transaction as well. Now it puts back onto the payment brand network saying that I have verified this. You can, and here is the response. So Visa, in this case, will send that response back to the SDFC, which is an acquirer, and will say, okay, you have got this response from the issuer, forward this response to the merchant. Once that response reaches the merchant, that's where the receipt comes out of the printing terminal or the PED terminal or a pin entry device. So all this submission of account information to merchant, then routing to acquirer, routing to the payment brand network, routing to issuer, decision taking care by the issuer, and then the decision coming back from issuer to payment brand, from payment brand to acquirer, and acquirer to merchant, and from merchant to card holder. All this cycle completes in a fraction of seconds, right? Now, for all the transaction that happens like this, 1.4% is what payment brand network slashes as the charge to connect issuer to the acquirer. So Visa says, since I am a high network or a high speed network, I have connected you both and I have enabled your business transaction to succeed. I will charge 1.4% of the entire transaction amount. So if I have made a transaction of 100 rupee on my card, then 1.4 rupees will go to a Visa. Okay. The acquirer says, since this transaction was not for me, but I have used my network to facilitate a merchant, I will take 0.4% out of it. So 0.4% of 100 rupee, which is a 40 paisa, will be taken care by the acquirer. So 40 paisa goes here, 1.4 rupees goes here. So out of 100, 1.8 rupees gets deducted and rest amount gets accounted into the merchant's account. So 97.2 rupees or 98.2 rupees will come into the merchant account. And that is where if you go to some of the shops and you say you want to pay by the card, they say we will take the card, but we will charge you 2% extra. This is the reason they charge you 2% extra, because 1.4% goes to the Visa network and 0.4% goes to the acquirer. So the merchant gets a minus 1.8% of the transaction into their account. That is where merchant says, I will charge you 2% extra if you give me a Visa or a MasterCard. What happens in case of an American Express? They don't have a payment, they don't have an acquirer or an issuer because they themselves are the account holders. So what they say, if any transaction for American Express comes, I will flat charge you 4%. So I will take 4% of all the transaction. So that is where most of the merchants, they don't keep American Express as a payment option because they are taking a minus 4% hit on the overall amount. And whosoever keeps American Express, they sometimes expressively say that if you give me American Express, I will charge you 4% extra. Right? Because that amount is being deducted by the American Express itself.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Now, this is the flow for an authorization. So if you see here, it's a transaction flow for authorization, the card or this transaction authorization. Once the transaction is done, the next day, so for example, if I have done a transaction today, next day morning, my clearing happens. So what happened? Every night, uh, So what happened every night when the merchant closes their store, they have to settle their transaction. So on the machine or the uh, PIN entry device that they have, they will settle the all day transactions. So they will click on the settlement button and a long receipt will come out, right? That is the clearing process. So what happens? The acquirer bank, which is the HDFC Bank in our example, HDFC Bank send the purchase information to the processor. Again, a payment brand network is utilized because HDFC doesn't know how to connect to ICICI directly. So HDFC reaches to Visa and says, I have these many, I have 100 rupee transaction to clear with ICICI Bank. And ICICI is connected to you, so help me connect to it. Visa will send that information to issuer saying that you have got 100 rupee transaction from HDFC yesterday, so please look into it. So ICICI will verify whether that transaction happened or not. And if yes, ICICI will say, yes, I am in receipt of 100 rupee or I am in receipt of that 100 rupee transaction. Payment brand network says, yes, I remember I have yesterday sent you a 100 rupee transaction. So I am also good with 100 rupee. Acquirer, HDFC Bank says, yes, I am also good with 100 rupee because that is what I have sent to Visa yesterday. So HDFC, Visa, and ICICI, all three comes in consensus on the next day for the last day transactions. So HDFC will say, yes, 100 rupee for ICICI, I have sent to Visa. Visa will say, yes, I agree. HDFC has sent me 100 rupee and I have forwarded that 100 rupee to ICICI. I am okay with it. ICICI will say, yes, I agree. Yesterday Visa sent me a 100 rupee check and I have cleared that 100 rupee check. So all three come in a reconciliation state. That is what a clearing takes place on a T plus
What if,
1 day.
yeah, what if acquirer and issuer falls under the same bank? For example, acquirer is HDFC and issuer is HDFC.
Then the payment brand network doesn't come into the picture.
So then the transaction charge will be 0.4%.
0.4% only, but then the merchant will not tell that to you.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I'm just
merchant will still,
understanding the concept. Yeah,
correct. Then it will be 0.4% only.
okay, got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on a T plus 1, the reconciliation of the payment happens. So all the three entities says and agrees to a particular amount. Now there might be a situation where a dispute happen, where an HDFC says, I have sent 1,000 rupees to Visa. Visa says, no, I have only received 900 from you. Then that 100 rupee gets into a dispute and that value gets put onto a hold for the merchant account. So merchant doesn't get that money till the time all the three entities comes into a consensus. So that money will be kept as pending for the merchant account, which is with the acquirer. Okay.
Yeah.
Then the T plus 2. So this is T plus 1. Clearing is a T plus 1, transaction plus 1 day. Next day, which is T plus 2, is when the actual settlement happens. Now, in this settlement, what happens is cardholder, so issuer bills the cardholder. So on the second day of the transaction, I will see a transaction on my card account. If I use American Express today, I will not see that transaction immediately. I will see that transaction on my account on a transaction plus 2 days. So issuer will bill cardholder for the transaction. So 100 rupee will be put onto the credit card of a cardholder. The payment brand network gets the 1.4% on a transaction plus 2 day. Acquirer gets their 0.4% on the T plus 2 day, and the merchant gets the amount in their account on a transaction plus 2 day. Okay. Do a transaction on
Yes.
a credit card. That's where many people say, I don't need a credit card because the payment will come into my account on after 2 days. So that's where merchant is getting the amount deposited in their account on the transaction plus 2, that is the settlement process. Clear?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it's clear.
Okay. Now, these are the basics from a PCI standpoint. Now we will come to the PCI standards. Okay. Now, we talked about a PCI Security Standards Council, and we looked at the role that they play in the overall life cycle of the payment as well. Now, in this case, PCI created some 5 security standards. One was a PCI PTS, which is for the manufacturers of the hardwares. Then they created a PCI PADSS, which is for a software developers or the third party providers like Razorpay. So they create an application which is a payment gateway. So PCI PADSS is for those application providers. Then they created a third standard, which is a PCI DSS, which is a data security standard. So PCI DSS, PCI Data Security Standard, is for the organization environment, wherein it doesn't only focus on application, it does not only focus on the network, it does not only focus on the user, but rather it focuses on everything which has to do with the security of the card data. So it can be a laptop, it can be a server, it can be a firewall device, it can be a user, it can be a normal calculator or a pen and a paper as well. So anything and everything to do with the security of the cardholder data is what comprises a PCI data security standard. Okay. Another standard that PCI Security Standards Council created was a P2PE. Now, this P2PE is for encryption and decryption and the key management for the hardware to hardware interaction. Okay, so PCI PTS, which is a pin transaction security devices like the PED terminals where we swipe the card and enter the pins, those will come under the PCI PTS. Any online transaction that we do on a Razorpay or a payment gateway, that will come under PCI PADSS. Any environment related or a data security at large that we see will come under a PCI DSS. P2PE, because it deals with the encryption, will cut across all the 3 security standards. Because encryption is required here, encryption is required here, and encryption is required here as well. Clear? Okay. Then comes a PCI PADSS security standard. So what happened? We have looked at the settlement authorization process, right? So any application which participate in a settlement or the authorization has to be a PADSS compliant. Okay. So for example, if we make a payment on Amazon.com, so that Amazon.com has to be a PADSS compliant where we enter the card information. So that application has to be a PADSS compliant. Similarly, if we transact over a Razorpay, or if we, let's say, if we purchase something from a website and that website takes us to a Razorpay website, then Razorpay, where we are entering the card data, has to be compliant with the PADSS security standard. Similarly, when we go to, let's say, a Shopper Stop. So in Shopper Stop, they have monitors. So they take our card, they swipe on the monitor itself. That monitor is a point of sale device, a POS device. So when they swipe the card on the monitor, they are basically storing our card data as well on their machine or on their systems. So those POS machines has to be a PADSS compliant software as well. Okay. So it says the PCI PADSS applies to third-party payment applications if application perform authorization and or settlement. Examples are POS, shopping carts, etc. Clear? Now, PCI PADSS ensures a payment application function in a PCI DSS compliant manner, which means if there is an environment or if there is a company which wants a PCI DSS compliance to happen, and they have PADSS software already, the PADSS application should supports the PCI DSS controls as well. So if in the company there is a PADSS software, it cannot happen that a PADSS software system is having a separate control and PCI says a separate control. So the company has to make sure that PADSS software is in compliance with the PCI DSS requirements as well. Okay, so that's on the PADSS. As an assessor or as a QSA, which is a qualified security assessor or auditor, whatever we want to call it, we must validate that payment application is installed as per the instruction in the PADSS guide, implementation guide, and or in the PCI DSS compliant manner. So as an auditor, when we go and audit an environment, we cannot leave a PADSS application as well. Many a time, the organization will tell you or the client will say that we have a PADSS certified application. You don't have to look at that. But no, as an auditor, it is your responsibility and your accountability as well to look at that PADSS application as well. I'll give you one example. There was a security breach that happened at Electrocard in 2012-2013 time period. During that time, they used to work very close with Mastercard, wherein Mastercard had a 12% stake in the overall business as well. So they were very, very close with the Mastercard. And I was in Verizon at that time. So Mastercard engaged Verizon to do a forensics of this cyber breach. So we went on site, we did the cyber breach investigation for it, and as part of it, we realized that Electrocard is already certified on the PCI DSS security standard as well. And they were like Razorpay only, wherein they were providing the payment gateway services to other banks as well. So Electrocard approached us and says that while you are auditing us, why don't you do our PCI audit as well? We said, okay, we'll do the PCI audit as well. And when we did our PCI audit, we found 1600 critical observations. And those critical observations were literally critical, as in they were using Windows XP as the server, and Windows XP was closed by Microsoft at that point in time. Nobody used to use Windows XP. They were using Windows XP without patches. So, kind of a situation. They had default username and password, and the passwords were as simple as 12345. Passwords were as simple as abc@123, and these passwords for their production databases, these passwords for their web servers, public web servers as well. So when we verified these details, or when we looked into these observations, we went back to them and asked, you are PCI compliant, then how come you are missing on these basic controls? And they says the earlier auditing organization never checked these things. They always asked us for the policy documents. We used to send them the policy documents, and that's how our audit used to happen. And this auditing organization is a very good name in the Indian industry from an auditor standpoint, and you will see many people from this company as well. But nevertheless, we did that audit, and we came out with 1600 observations, all critical in nature, and they fixed those observations later. So that is where, as an auditor, it is your responsibility to make sure that you look at each and every aspect from a security standpoint, even if somebody says that they are already compliant, or if they say they already have a certified software in their environment, it is your responsibility as an auditor to verify those details as well.
So in this course, that part also we are learning. For example, PCI auditing part also we are learning.
So we are going to look at the security controls. We are
Okay.
going to develop a checklist based on those security controls as well. Uh,
Okay.
but real auditing, unfortunately, we'll not be able to do. But
No,
I
real
will,
auditing we can't do also, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But from an audit standpoint, we will look at how we create a project plan for an audit. We will look at what security controls or how we approach an audit, how we start an audit. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, who all are the stakeholders who we will be meeting when we are doing the audit, and what kind of questions we are putting to them,
Okay.
and what is the intent of those questions. So we will look at those aspects as well.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then next comes is a PCI PTS security standard. This applies for the pin entry devices where the individual enters the ATM pin. So it is a card present situation. So if PTS device is a standalone, it only the PTS applies. If PTS device is integrated with a POS machine, then a PADSS also applies here because POS is a software which needs to be a PADSS compliant. And why PADSS? Because it participates in the settlement and or authorization as well. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Then we have a P2PE hardware to hardware. So it basically is for a point of interaction device, and it is for devices like if you have seen. So if you go to a Reliance Trend or a Reliance Digital, they have a very small device which is again a pin entry device only, where you insert the card, you tap on the pin, and you don't get the receipt out, but rather you get a SMS on your mobile that the transaction is done. It's a very, very small pocket handheld device. So that's where P2PE is related, because the moment you do a transaction, either you get an SMS or a thermal printer gets activated and the receipt comes out of a thermal printer as well. So that's where the P2PE hardware to hardware interaction happens, and it's a point to point encryption that this standard talks about. And then comes the PCI DSS security standard. Now, I talked about a maintenance of the standard as well. So for all the standards, what they do, they have a 3-year cycle. So in first year, every October, start of let's say first year cycle, they will release the draft, or they will release the standard uh, into the public domain. In next 3 months, that draft or that standard becomes active. So when I say active, that's where the organizations are expected to start implementing those security standards from a January 1 of the year 1. Then the entire year goes in the implementation. So any audit that happen in that year 1 can happen on the last year standard as well. So let's say this 2021 October, a new standard of PCI, let's say PCI version 4 comes out, then I am still okay to do a implementation of version 4 in the 2022. Plus my this year standard, which is 3.8.1, is still valid for an audit in the next year, which is 2022. But beyond 2022, I have to use a version 4 of the standard only. So this year 1 is for an implementation of the updated standard. Year 2 is when the feedback starts to be collated. So the PCI Council gets a feedback from the issuers, they get the feedback from acquirers, they get the feedback from a high transaction merchants as well, that these are the controls which is working well for them. These are the controls which is very, very hard to implement. These are the controls for which we need very high investment. So that's where the feedback starts to flow to PCI Council in the year 2. In the year 3, they start to document the revision to the standard. So they improve the standard, they reduce some complexity, or they include new controls. So they create that draft in the year 3. And then between May and July of the year 3, a final review happens. And then in the year 3, October, a new standard comes out. Okay. And this new standard may be a major change or maybe a minor change as well.
So this complete cycle will be decided by PCI authorities?
Yes. Yes. PCI Security Standards Council.
Okay. Okay, fine. So
Okay. And
if someone is establishing this in a new way, they are doing it, or how
yeah,
it
so
is?
yeah, so for example, if I as an organization, if I want to implement PCI today in 2021 May, I
Okay.
will go to the Security Council's website. I will download whatever is available there, which is
Okay.
a 3.8.1. I will download that and I will use that standard.
Okay.
Okay. In October, when a new standard comes out, then I have an opportunity to either upgrade myself to that standard or retain my existing standard for another year. So that
Okay.
opportunity I have
Okay. In the year two.
in the year 2, yes.
Okay. So for coming it live, it almost takes 3 months, right?
3 years.
3 years. For
Yeah.
coming live, it's taking 3 years. So here in the third position, market implementation is there, right? So that's a
Yes.
testing trial kind of thing.
No, that's not a trial. It's an actual rollout where PCI says any new audit that you start from here onward has to be on the newer version.
Okay. Okay, got
Okay.
it. So we are not going live, but
Yeah.
what?
So if you're already certified for the year 1, you can retain your existing version. But if you are implementing for the first time, go with the
Okay.
newer version.
Okay. Okay, got it. Got it.
Okay. So that's a 3-year cycle that they follow. Now, the PCI Data Security Standard, which is PCI DSS, is a minimum set of baseline controls for technical, administrative, and physical security requirements for protection of the cardholder data. Cardholder data we have seen, the cardholder data is a cardholder name, it's a account number, expiration date, sensitive authentication data, CVV2, track 1 and track 2, all that is a cardholder data. The minimum set of baseline means it's a binary standard. So PCI is not like ISO. PCI controls are binary in nature. When I say binary, it is either true or false. So you don't have too much of a space to play around with the words. So the PCI control will be you should have minimum 7 characters of password. That's it. You have 7 characters or you don't have a 7 characters. PCI will say your password should have a maximum expiration age of 90 days. So either you have 90 days as a password maximum password age or you don't have a maximum password expiration date of 90 days. So it is a binary standard in that sense. There are certain controls which are subjective, but majority of the controls which are defined in PCI are very, very objective in nature, very straightforward and very simple to understand. Okay. And
Okay.
it covers technical, administrative and physical security, all the three requirements. So technical means it will talk about firewall, it will talk about intrusion prevention, it will talk about network time, it will talk about logging, it will talk about user access. So all that is a technical. Administrative is where it talks about the processes, where it talks about the policies, where it talks about the documentation. So all that is administrative. Physical security is where it talks about CCTV. It talks about the access cards. It talks about the verification or entry to the building premise. So all that is a physical security requirements that this data security standard talks about. Now
Okay.
this, unlike the earlier standards like PADSS, PCI PTS, P2PE, etc., that we have seen, this PCI DSS is applicable to all the merchants, service providers, and the banks. So it is a common standard wherein you can really have this implemented for all the environment, which is either storing, processing, or transmitting the cardholder data. Storing means store means I can store it in a log, I can store it in a file, I can store it in an Excel, I can store it in a database. All that will constitute as a storage. Processing means where I am having an access to that information. For example, a BPO. A BPO agent sees a card number on the application to verify the card details of a caller, or the BPO agent is working on reconciling uh, the invoice, for example. That's where he or she has the capacity to look at the card number. Or there is a dispute that has been raised and the person needs to verify your card number on a call. So the BPO environment is largely where the processing happens.
Yeah.
Okay, it can happen in other environments as
So
well.
even the BPO who wants to acquire this banking sector into there, who wants to merge this banking sector into there for customer service, even
Hmm.
they need to follow this 3 years protocol.
Yes.
Okay. So for example, let's say we have a BPO and we want to get a banking project.
Hmm.
Where we can check the card holder details, we can block the credit cards, we can unblock it, we can help them with pin change kind of. So
Correct.
if we want to establish such sector, we need to put an application before 3 years.
No. So if you have to establish that, what you will do, you will go to PCI Security Standards Council. You will
Okay.
download the current version. So let me just open that quickly. So let's say I am a company so let's say Proton Technosoft wants to implement a PCI security standard right now. Okay.
Okay.
So what I will do, I will go to PCI SSC website
Okay.
and I will download the latest available standard here. So I will go to document library. I will look at a PCI DSS and English language. I accept and it should download. Okay, so this is the standard that is available. Now,
Okay.
this is as of May 2018,
Okay.
right? Which
Hmm.
means that this year, 2019, 2020, 2021 is a third year,
Hmm.
right? So this
Yeah.
year, a version 4 or an upgrade version of 3.2.1 will come out.
Okay.
Okay. So as of today, if I have to implement PCI, I will go with version 3.2.1.
Okay.
Okay. In October, when version 4 comes out, that's where I have an option either to stick with 3.2.1 for another 1 year or upgrade myself immediately on version 4.
Okay. Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Mhm. But after an year, 100% you need to upgrade.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Got it.
Clear?
Yes.
Perfect. Now, so this is a minimum set of baseline controls, applies to all the entities, and it also applies to the all the channels as well. So for example, card present, which is a retail store kind of a situation, card not present, which is a e-commerce or an online transaction. It can be a mail order as well. So what happened in US, you do a mail order. So you basically write your card details on a form and you send that form to a processing. So I remember I was doing an audit for a company in US where they were receiving the mail orders for the magazine subscription. So
Okay.
if I have to take a magazine subscription, there is a form in the magazine itself, which I have to fill with my card detail and courier or mail that card to a particular address. On that particular address, there is a service provider who will receive that form, put that card detail into an application, and will tear off that form. Once
Okay.
that once that card detail is into the application, on based on the details that I have shared on for that card, he will do the transaction on my behalf.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm.
So that's a mail order situation, which is predominantly in the western side, not very prominent here in Asia, but in European Union and in US, it's very, very predominant. Then over the phone as well. So sometime we call up a yatra.com and say, can you book a flight for us? And they ask us, can you share your card details? I will put your call onto auto response. So you enter your card details there, verify your PIN, and once that system verifies your card, we will process your ticket here. So that is the over the phone transaction.
Okay.
Okay. So all these channels are also covered by the PCI data security standard. So irrespective from where you collect the cardholder data, the moment it is inside your network, you have to secure it, right?
Yeah.
Now, from a PCI, DSS and PTS standpoint, PCI says you can store all the cardholder information in your environment with the required security levels. So you can store PAN numbers, which is a 16-digit number. You can store cardholder name. You can store expiration date as well, but you cannot store under any circumstances. You cannot store any authentication information like CVV2, like ATM pin, like P-pin, CVV. So you cannot store any sensitive authentication data.
Okay.
Even in the encrypted format, you cannot store it.
Okay.
Okay. That's what the PCI DSS and PTS talks about. The rest of the cardholder data, like for example, the 16-digit cardholder data, that you can store, but there are certain requirements that you have to meet before storing that card data. So you have to either encrypt it, or you have to truncate it, or you have to tokenize it, or you have to mask it. And we will look at all these four in detail as we progress. So there are certain requirements for the storage of card data, which is prescribed by the PCI Council. The other one, which is PADSS and PCI DSS, the PADSS is for the payment application, wherein the PCI DSS is for the entire environment. And that is where some of the requirements are common between the two. So if we look at software requirements in PCI and the requirements of PADSS, those are kind of common requirements.
Okay.
Okay. Then P2PE and PCI DSS. P2PE is for a point-to-point encryption, and PCI DSS also talks about encryption so that whatever is getting stored or processed or transmitted, all the three are in encrypted format. So again, the requirements are very much common from the standard perspective. Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Right. And that brings us to a merchant level and the reporting requirements. Now, merchants are, if you remember, merchants are the entities which basically who are the beneficiary of the payment. So they are the sellers or the businesses. Now, merchants, the merchant levels are determined by the acquirer based on the number of transactions or the volume of the business that they are generating. So if I am a person like Amazon, I will be a tier one where multi-million transactions happen. If I am a small time merchant where only one or two or couple of hundreds or couple of thousands transaction happen, I will probably a merchant level 4. So different payment brands have different merchant levels defined. So for example, Discover, MasterCard and Visa, they have defined 4 merchant levels. American Express have defined 3 merchant levels and JCB have defined 2 merchant levels. So these are the merchant levels defined by the respective payment brands. For example, a level 1 merchant for American Express is someone who is processing over 2.5 million American Express card transactions annually, which means about 25 lakhs transactions annually on the American Express, irrespective of the amount. So it is a number of transactions, not the amount of transactions. Okay. Discover is treats somebody as a level 1 merchant who is processing over 6 million transactions on the Discover network. So American Express has 2.5, Discover has a requirement of 6 million. JCB has a requirement of 1 million international transactions annually for the JCB network, or some merchant who is processing JCB data or a JCB transaction, but is already compromised as well. Okay, so American Express 2.5 million, Discover 6 million, JCB 1 million, MasterCard 6 million, Visa Inc., which is a USA entity, 6 million, and Visa Europe is again a 6 million transactions. So if I let's say Proton Technosoft is providing 2.5 million transactions to American Express and let's say 6 million to Visa, then I will be categorized as level 1 for American Express and level 1 for Visa Inc. and Europe as well, depending upon where I am, where customers I am supporting. Okay. Similarly, from a level 2 perspective, we have a range of 50,000 to 2.5 million for American Express card transactions. For a level 2 merchant in American Express, in Discover, that range is between 1 to 6 million. In JCB, it is less than 1 million because JCB has only 2 merchant levels. So JCB 1 million, MasterCard 1 to 6 million, Visa again 1 to 6 in both the cases. So if you largely see the MasterCard and Visa, they have a very, very common definition of the merchant levels as well. Right? So this is clear?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Then from a level 3 and level 4 perspective, American Express says anybody who is doing less than 50,000 transactions annually will be a level 3 for me. Discover says anybody who is processing 20,000 to 1 million card not present, only transaction will be considered as a level 3. JCB doesn't have any level 3 and level 4. MasterCard says between 20,000 to 1 million will be a level 3, and same goes with the Visa as well. Similar is the case down below. So American Express has only 3 merchant levels, so it doesn't have any fourth one. Discover says if somebody is doing less than 20,000, I will treat them as a level 4 merchant. MasterCard says if somebody is doing less than 20,000, I will consider them as a level 4, and same goes with the Visa as well. Now, why these segmentation of merchants is there? Depending upon the number of transactions a particular merchant is carrying on a particular payment brand network, that's where the risk of getting compromised is higher. So if I am providing high number of transactions, which means the attacker would also be interested in looking in those transactions because of the high volume.
Yeah,
So
true.
they will also be attracted toward it. So that is where Visa and MasterCard, they want higher confidence on these merchants, that it is good that you are providing business to me, but then I am also looking at from a risk standpoint, since you are generating more transaction, your business is more riskier as well, right? So that is where they define the requirements for the validation as well for these merchant levels as well. So for instance, in level 1, in level 1, American Express says if you are a level 1 merchant, you need to get a independent audit done by a QSA. QSA is a qualified security assessor. So you have to engage an independent auditor to do a QSA audit. Or if your CEO, CFO, CIO, CISO, if these CXOs are okay to sign your self-assessment report or self-audited report, then also I am good. So either a QSA audit needs to happen, or your CXO sign up that report internally.
So to become a QSC, I mean auditor, what kind of certifications we should take?
Okay. So to become a QSA, first of all, the company, the auditing company has to
Okay.
be a QSA. So first of all, as an organization, if as an auditing organization, I have to apply for a license of a QSA company.
Okay.
Okay. So in that license process, I have to take up a insurance worth 25 lakh rupee as well.
Okay.
So there will be multiple insurances. All that cost will provide me a coverage of multiple crores from a coverage standpoint.
Okay.
And the value of those insurances will be to the tunes of between 12 lakhs to 25 lakhs.
Okay.
So then I have to file an application with the council saying
Oh,
that I have applied for a QSA license as an organization. These
okay.
are my processes. These are my insurances. And this is what my website is. These are the services that I intend to provide.
Okay.
PCI Council then reviews that application and approve the license for a company.
Okay.
Once the company is QSA certified, then company says these are 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the number of people. I intend to make them auditors as well. So they will also become a QSAs.
Okay. So there is no specified certificate for auditors. The company should get certified.
First, the company will get certified,
Okay.
then the individual will get certified.
Okay.
So the individual will have to do a PCI QSA certification.
Okay.
Okay. And that QSA certification is worth 2.5 lakh rupee per person.
Okay.
and the training happens for 5 days. 5 days, I remember. So the training happened for 5 days, mostly in the US.
Okay.
Okay, so once you complete that training, on the last day you have an exam. Once you clear that exam, that's where you get the certification done.
Okay. So for organization also they'll keep such exams?
No, for organization there is no exam. So
Okay.
first organization achieve a QSA license, then the organization will sponsor their employees to do a QSA certification. So the
Okay.
cost will be taken care by the company. They
Okay.
will send the employee to the PCI council for the training and for the exam. Once the
Okay.
person clears the exam, then they are also a QSA.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, and on the PCI website itself, you can verify the details of a QSA. So for example, if I show you quickly, so if I see here and I say validate, let's say, so list of validated products and solutions. Similarly, there will be it is better to search in Google, I would say. Yeah. So here, if you really put up, it will come. So for example, if I try putting up my name, though my certification is expired, so no, so, but you can look at by the company. So my certification expired when I joined PwC. So I was a QSA in Verizon because Verizon is a QSA company.
Okay.
PwC, when I joined, they were not a QSA company. So my license is tied with the company as well. So the
Okay.
moment I joined PwC, uh, and since PwC was not a QSA organization, my license expired.
Okay. So you're like our license will stay till we work with the company who is having this QSA.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Got it.
Yeah. So for example, if I look at this 360, whatever the company is, uh, so they will have a QSA services or a PCI compliance services,
Okay.
right?
So
Which
this
means they
this
have,
should be this should be kept only if we are QSA certified.
yes,
Okay.
that is where you are authorized to do an audit. So for example, Proton Technosoft is
Okay.
not a authorized QSA.
Okay.
Okay. So if I, for example, or if Pernica, let's say, sells a QSA audit service
Hmm.
on Proton, that is
Hmm.
illegal.
Okay.
Okay, they can still sell implementation, they can still sell advisory, but they cannot sell audit.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Advisory trainings, everything can be done, but audit is illegal.
Yes. Audit is
Okay.
illegal. Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So PCI Council maintain the list of authorized companies, authorized softwares, authorized individuals who can do the audit on the PCI as well.
Okay.
Okay. So American Express says you have to get the annual on-site assessment performed by a auditor, or yourself if you certify your report by a CEO, CFO, CISO of your company.
Okay.
Okay. Similar is the case with Discover. So they say annual audit, independent audit, or somebody from an internal audit team certify that we have taken a look at our environment and everything is in compliance to PCI requirements. So that will be acceptable to Discover.
Okay.
JCB says, I need an audit. MasterCard says, I need an audit. And Visa says, I need an audit.
So who is this guy who is merchant's internal auditor qualified as ISC?
Yes. So, for example, if I am a bank,
Okay.
I don't intend to do an audit for other banks, but I want somebody to be qualified enough in my bank to implement or to audit the PCI standard. Then, rather than the QSA certification, I can send somebody for an ISA certification.
Okay.
Okay, both are same. The intention of QSA is a auditing. The intention of ISA is a implementation.
Okay. So for
Okay,
taking this ISC, what will be the requirements?
same
For
again. So
example, if we are taking QSA, the organization should be QSA, right? So like
correct.
that, for taking ISA, what will be the requirement?
Nothing. You just have to get a sponsorship from your company to do the ISA exam,
Okay. Okay. Got it.
and the fee for both are the same.
Okay. Uh, so what's the major difference? So you said this is auditing and this is implementation.
Yes. So QSA are the authorized individuals who can do audit for any company.
Okay.
ISA are the internal auditors, so they can
Okay.
only work in their own company.
Okay. They can't audit for the other companies. Got it.
Yes, you.
It's
Yeah.
like these people will be settled in a product based things, while as
Yes.
QSA can give service based also. Okay. Got it.
Yes. Absolutely. Okay.
Hmm.
Then a level two merchant, an American Express says a level two merchant needs to have a self-assessment questionnaire done. Okay, so there is a questionnaire. We will look at those questionnaires as well as we progress. So
Okay.
there are set of questionnaires which PCI Council or American Express says if you are a level two merchant, you don't have to go for a full-fledged audit. You can self-certify, you can fill up a questionnaire and self-certify that you are taking care of the security controls.
Okay.
Okay. Similar is the thing that Discover says, JCB says, MasterCard says it has to be an on-site audit itself. Visa says self-assessment questionnaire is good enough.
Okay.
Again, for a level 3 merchant, American Express says self-assessment questionnaire is good. Discover says self-assessment is good. MasterCard says self-assessment is good. Visa says self-assessment is good.
Okay.
Okay. So it's only a level 1 merchant and a level 2 merchant where you may need a external audit. Level 1, 100% you need to go for an external audit. Level 2, depending upon the transactions, the bucket that you are falling in, you can go with a self-assessment or you can go with the internal audit as well.
Okay. Got it.
Clear?
Yes.
All right. So we will keep it till here itself today. Okay.
Okay.
I will share this slides with you over a
Okay.
SharePoint
Okay.
and you can download, you can view it there perfectly fine. So
Okay.
take your time to absorb this because
Sure.
there is a lot of text into it. So
Yeah.
take a time to absorb this content. And Sunday, we will log in to see if you have any questions available.
Sure.
Sure.
Sure. Sure, Paras. Thank you so much for the class.
All right, no worries, Nikita. Have a rest of the day as a great day ahead. Though I would say just a couple of hours, but still have a great day ahead. And
Thank you.
thank you so much for joining.
Sure,
Thank,
Paras. Thanks for teaching me a lot of stuff, and thank you, Parnika.
thank you, Nikita. Thank you, Paras. Thank you for the time.
Yeah.
And Nikita, you just let me know if you need a class on Sunday. As Paras told you that if you have any doubts, we will clear it on Sunday.
Okay. Fine, Parnika. I'll text you or WhatsApp. Okay.
Yeah, sure, sure. Not a
Yeah.
problem.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
okay, good. Thank you.